Today's video is a detailed review and analysis of the movie The Equalizer 3, starring Denzel Washington. This is not a full movie and not a movie troll. Businesses are forced to pay. People are silenced. And those who resist disappear. McCall's world he once operated in. He still works in the shadows, still influences outcomes without being seen. But this flames tear through Angelo's fish shop, consuming not just his livelihood, but the illusion that anyone here is safe. The fire spreads fast, lighting up the darkness, drawing the entire town into a moment of shared helplessness. People gather, watching in horror, knowing exactly who is responsible yet unable to do anything about it. This is the true power of the Camorra, not violence alone, inside it. And McCall doesn't ignore systems like this. Meanwhile, Gio Benucci begins his own quiet resistance. As a law enforcement officer, he represents order, but in a place like this, the law has limits. Still, he investigates stuff. It's not a negotiation, it's a warning disguised as politeness. Marco, of course, laughs it off. To him, McCall is just another outsider, another man who doesn't understand how things work here. And that's the mistake everyone don't understand is that McCall has already calculated everything. He knows exactly how this ends. When Marco refuses, when he dismisses the warning, he unknowingly signs his own fate. What follows is not a fight, it's a correction. McCall moves with the same precision, the same efficiency we saw but because they left him no other choice. The violence is controlled, purposeful, almost surgical. And when it's over, there is no celebration, no sense of victory, only silence. Because McCall knows what comes next. When a system like the Camorra loses one of its own, it doesn't retreat, it responds. And Vincent Quaranta is not a man who negotiates with loss, he weaponizes it. Unlike his brother, Vincent doesn't rely on the people don't know exactly what happened, but they feel it. Something has changed. And McCall knows exactly what that something is. This was never going to end with Marco. That was just the first move. While Vincent builds his response from afar, the consequences begin to take shape within the town itself. Gio Benucci, already walking a dangerous line, becomes the next target, not because he reaches every corner of Altamonte, reinforcing the same message, no one is safe and no one can fight back. But what Vincent and his men don't understand is that they are repeating a pattern McCall has seen too many times before. They believe fear creates control, but in reality, it creates something else too. It creates a moment where someone decides they've had enough. And that someone is McCall. At the same time, another thread of the story begins to tighten: Emma Collins. What started as a simple tip evolves into something much larger, something deeply connected to a network of corruption, drugs, and power stretching far beyond Italy. Through McCall's anonymous guidance, Emma begins uncovering the scale of the operation: money hidden in plain sight, drugs distributed across borders, systems manipulated from within. But as she gets closer to the truth, she also gets closer to danger. Vincent is not just watching Altamont, he is watching everything. And when Emma becomes a threat, he doesn't hesitate. The bomb placed in her car is not just an attack, it's a message. A reminder that no one, not even someone inside the system, is untouchable. The explosion is sudden, violent, and shocking, but Emma survives. And that survival matters. Because now, this is no longer just an investigation, it's personal. For both her and McCall. When McCall learns what happened, there is no visible reaction, no dramatic shift, but something inside him locks into place. The line is gone. This is no longer about protecting a town quietly or solving things from the shadows. This is war. And Vincent, for all his power and control, has made one critical mistake. He has forced McCall to stop holding back. As Vincent prepares to step into Altamonte himself, believing he is walking into a town he already owns, he doesn't realize he is walking into something else entirely. Something he cannot control, cannot predict, and cannot survive. Because Robert McCall is no longer observing, he is coming. Vincent Quaranta does not arrive in Altamonte like a man seeking answers. He arrives like a man who already owns the outcome. His presence alone shifts the atmosphere of the town, turning quiet tension into suffocating pressure. Unlike Marco, Vincent doesn't waste time proving power through small acts. His authority is already established long before he sets foot on those narrow streets. The people feel it instantly. Doors close earlier, conversations fade into whispers, and even the air seems heavier, as if the town itself understands that something irreversible is about to happen. Vincent walks through Altamonte not with haste, but with controlled patience, observing, measuring, identifying weaknesses. To him, this is not a town, it's a system that has briefly slipped out of his control, and now he's here to correct it. The death of his brother is not something he mourns publicly. Instead, it becomes fuel, justification for what comes next. His goal is simple: find the man responsible and make an example so severe that no one ever dares challenge him again. And to achieve that, he doesn't go after the strongest. He goes after the most visible symbol of resistance. Gio Benucci. The confrontation is staged deliberately, almost theatrically, because Vincent understands the psychology of fear better than anyone. He doesn't hide his actions, he wants them seen. In the center of the town, surrounded by the very people he controls, Gio is dragged forward, broken but still standing, his pain evident yet his spirit not entirely crushed. This is not just punishment, it's a demonstration. Vincent addresses the crowd not with shouting, but with quiet authority, his voice steady, almost calm, as he makes his intentions clear. Someone in this town killed his brother. Someone here thinks they can resist. And unless that person steps forward, Gio will pay the price. The brilliance and cruelty of this moment lies in its design. Vincent doesn't just want to find McCall, he wants the town to betray him. He wants fear to override loyalty, survival to outweigh morality. Because if the people break, if they turn on one of their own, then his control becomes absolute. And for a moment, it almost works. The silence stretches, heavy and unbearable, as the townspeople look at each other, trapped between fear and conscience. This is the moment that defines them, not as individuals, but as a community. And just when it seems like fear might win, something unexpected happens. McCall steps forward. Not dramatically, not with force, but with calm certainty, the same quiet presence that has defined him from the beginning. There is no hesitation in his movement, no doubt in his decision. He doesn't look at the crowd for approval, doesn't seek validation, he simply reveals himself. And in that moment, everything changes. The fear that Vincent carefully constructed begins to crack, because the town sees something different. They see a man who is not afraid. And courage, once visible, is contagious. One by one, people begin to raise their phones, recording, standing their ground, not because they believe they can fight Vincent, but because they are no longer willing to surrender completely. This is the shift Vincent didn't anticipate. He understands control, he understands fear, but he underestimated unity. And for the first time, his position becomes unstable. Not weak, but challenged. He cannot act recklessly here, not in front of witnesses, not with eyes documenting every move. So he does something unexpected. He retreats. Not in defeat, but in calculation. Because Vincent doesn't lose control, he regains it differently. As he walks away, leaving Gio alive and McCall standing, the message is clear. This isn't over. This was just the opening move. But what Vincent doesn't fully understand is that by forcing McCall into the open, he hasn't just found his enemy, he has unleashed him. Because now, there is no more hiding, no more observing, no more waiting. The line has been crossed completely. And that night, as Altamonte holds its breath, as the town sits on the edge of something inevitable, McCall prepares for what he has always been best at, not defense, not negotiation, but ending things. Night in Altamonte carries a different weight now, not the peaceful stillness it once held, but a charged silence, the kind that exists just before something decisive unfolds. The town sleeps lightly, aware that the balance has shifted, that whatever protection they briefly felt has been replaced by something far more dangerous: anticipation. But while the people wait, uncertain of what comes next, Robert McCall does not wait. For him, the path is already clear. There is no longer a question of whether action is necessary, only how it will be executed. And as the darkness settles fully over the region, McCall begins to move, not as a man reacting to events, but as one who has already calculated their outcome. Vincent Quaranta believes he has time, believes he can regroup, strategize, and strike back on his own terms. But that belief is his greatest mistake. Because McCall doesn't operate on his enemies' timelines, he disrupts them entirely. The journey to Vincent's world is quiet, almost invisible, a transition from the open vulnerability of Altamonte to the guarded isolation of power. The mansion stands as a symbol of control, wealth, and untouchable authority, surrounded by security, men trained to protect, systems designed to detect threats. But what Vincent and his empire fail to understand is that McCall is not a threat in the conventional sense. He is not loud, not reckless, not driven by ego. He is precise. And precision doesn't announce itself, it appears when it's already too late. The infiltration is not chaotic. It's methodical, almost surgical in its execution. Every guard, every movement, every shadow is accounted for before McCall even steps inside. There is no wasted motion, no unnecessary force. Each action serves a purpose, each decision eliminates a variable. One by one, Vincent's defenses begin to collapse, not in a dramatic explosion of violence, but in quiet, controlled removals. Men disappear without a sound, their absence unnoticed until it's already irrelevant. This is not a battle, it's a dismantling. McCall doesn't rush, because he doesn't need to. He understands the environment, the psychology of those guarding it, the false sense of security that comes with believing you are untouchable. And as he moves deeper into the mansion, the illusion of control that Vincent built begins to unravel piece by piece. What makes this moment so powerful is not just the physical dominance McCall displays, but the psychological shift it creates. For the first time, Vincent is no longer the one in control of the narrative. The hunter becomes the hunted, not through fear alone, but through realization. Realization that the rules he relies on do not apply here. Realization that the system he built cannot protect him from something it cannot predict. And when McCall finally stands before him, there is no chaos, no shouting, no unnecessary confrontation, just presence. Calm, controlled, inevitable. The final confrontation between McCall and Vincent is not defined by violence. It is defined by understanding. Vincent, for all his power, all his influence, all his carefully constructed dominance, is faced with something he cannot manipulate. He tries, of course. He speaks, attempts to regain control through words, through the same psychological tactics that have worked for him countless times before. But McCall doesn't engage in that game, because he doesn't need to prove anything. He already knows how this ends. And that certainty is what makes him truly dangerous. What follows is not revenge, it is consequence. McCall uses the very system Vincent profited from, the very drugs that poison lives across countries, as the instrument of his end. It is not just a physical defeat, it is symbolic, a reflection of everything Vincent represents being turned against him. And when it's over, there is no celebration, no satisfaction in the traditional sense. Only closure. Because for McCall, this was never about personal gain. It was about restoring balance. Back in Altamonte, the impact of that night is not immediately visible, but it is deeply felt. The fear that once defined the town begins to lift, replaced slowly by something unfamiliar yet powerful: freedom. And as McCall returns, not as a hero seeking recognition, but as a man quietly stepping back into the life he briefly found, the story reaches something rare for a character like him: peace. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. Because in the end, McCall doesn't just eliminate threats, he creates space for something better to exist. And in Altamonte, for the first time in a long time, that possibility becomes real. What follows Vincent Quaranta's fall is not immediate celebration, not loud victory, but something far more powerful: a slow, almost uncertain return to normalcy, as if the town itself needs time to believe that the weight pressing down on it is finally gone. Altamonte doesn't erupt into joy overnight. Fear, after all, doesn't disappear the moment the source is removed. It lingers, embedded in memory, in habit, in the way people look over their shoulders even when there's nothing there. But gradually, something begins to change. The silence that once felt suffocating now feels calm. The streets that emptied early begin to fill again, not all at once, but in small, meaningful ways. Shop doors open without hesitation, conversations stretch longer, laughter returns cautiously, like a sound rediscovered after being forgotten. Angelo rebuilds his store, not just as an act of survival, but as a statement that life here will continue, that the town will not be defined by what tried to destroy it. Gio Benucci, carrying both the physical and emotional scars of what he endured, returns not as a broken man, but as someone who understands the true cost of standing up against something larger than himself. His presence becomes a quiet symbol for the town, a reminder that resistance, even when painful, matters. And through all of this, Robert McCall remains exactly who he has always been, present, yet distant, part of the town, yet never fully belonging to it. He watches the change not with pride, but with quiet acknowledgement. Because for him, this was never about being seen as a savior. It was about restoring something that had been taken. And now that it's returning, his role begins to fade once again into the background. But while Altamonte heals, the larger world continues to move, and within it, Emma Collins stands at a crossroads shaped by everything that has happened. Her investigation, once just another assignment, has become something deeply personal, not only because of the danger she faced, but because of what she has discovered about the system, about the reach of corruption, and most importantly, about Robert McCall himself. Through the evidence, the patterns, and the quiet guidance he provided, she begins to understand that McCall is not just an operative working outside the rules. He is someone who exists beyond them entirely. His actions cannot be categorized, his methods cannot be officially justified, yet the results speak louder than any report ever could. When she receives recognition for dismantling the network tied to the Camorra operations, it comes with the usual formalities: promotion, acknowledgement, validation from a system that rarely sees the full picture. But Emma knows the truth. She knows that without McCall, none of this would have happened. And when she receives the package he leaves behind, it is not just a gesture, it is a message. Inside it lies not only information, not just tools or resources, but something more personal, something that connects her to a past she didn't fully understand until now. The revelation about her mother, about her connection to McCall's former life, reframes everything. It transforms their partnership from coincidence into something almost inevitable. And in that moment, Emma realizes that McCall's influence is not just external, it's generational, something that extends beyond missions and operations into the lives he touches in ways he never openly acknowledges. Back in Altamonte, life continues to move forward, and for the first time, Robert McCall allows himself to exist within it, even if only briefly. The celebration of the local football team becomes more than just a moment of joy. It becomes a symbol of everything the town has regained. Unity, pride, identity. People gather, not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection, something that was nearly lost under the weight of fear. McCall sits among them, not at the center, not as the reason for their happiness, but as a quiet participant in it. He listens, observes, allows himself to be present in a way that feels different from before. This is not the man we saw at the beginning, moving from place to place, detached, focused solely on correcting wrongs. This is someone who has found, even if temporarily, a sense of belonging. But the nature of who McCall is means that this moment cannot last forever. He understands that peace, for someone like him, is not a destination, it's a pause. And as the night continues, as the laughter grows and the town embraces its newfound freedom, McCall begins to prepare for what comes next. Not another mission, not another battle, but simply movement. Because that is his role in the world. To arrive where he is needed, to restore balance, and then to disappear before his presence becomes something else. And as the camera of this story slowly pulls away from Altamonte, from the people rebuilding their lives, from the man who made it possible, one truth becomes clear. Robert McCall is not just a protector, not just a force of justice. He is a constant in a world that is always out of balance. And wherever that imbalance appears next, he will be there. What makes Robert McCall different from every other man who has walked through violence is not his ability to survive it. It's his ability to walk away from it without carrying the need to prove anything. And yet, even in Altamonte, even after restoring balance, there is a quiet truth that lingers beneath the surface. Men like McCall don't retire from who they are. They adapt, they slow down, they try to exist within peace, but they never fully escape the instinct that defines them. And that's where the deeper story begins, not in action, not in conflict, but in understanding. Because what we're witnessing now is not just the aftermath of a war, but the internal landscape of a man who has spent his entire life solving problems that others couldn't. Sitting in that small Italian town, surrounded by people who laugh, celebrate, and rebuild without truly knowing the full extent of what he did for them, McCall becomes something almost invisible again. And that invisibility is not accidental, it's intentional. He doesn't want gratitude, doesn't seek recognition, because for him, the act of helping is not transactional. It's necessary. But necessity comes with a cost. Because when your purpose is tied to fixing broken systems, you begin to realize that the world will never stop needing you. And that realization creates a question that McCall doesn't ask out loud, but lives with constantly. What happens when there are no more problems left to solve? Or worse, what happens if there are too many? The beauty of Altamonte is not just that it represents peace, it's that it challenges McCall's identity in a way nothing else ever has. Here, he is not required to be the equalizer. No one is asking him to step in, no one is depending on him to correct something wrong. For the first time in a long time, he exists in a space where his skills are not needed, where his past is irrelevant, where his presence is simply human. And that creates a subtle but powerful tension within him. Because when your entire life has been built around purpose, around action, around being the solution, the absence of that can feel just as heavy as the chaos you left behind. McCall walks through the town, observing life in its simplest form, people buying food, children playing, conversations happening without fear, and instead of analyzing it, instead of searching for cracks in the system, he allows himself to experience it. But even in these moments, there is distance. Not physical distance, but emotional awareness. He knows this life is not fully his. He knows that eventually, something will pull him away, whether it's a new injustice, a new imbalance, or simply the understanding that he doesn't belong in places that don't need fixing. And yet, despite that awareness, there is a part of him that wants to stay. Not because he is tired, not because he is running from something, but because this is the closest he has come to something real. Something lasting. And that desire, however quiet, however controlled, is what makes his character so complex. Because it shows that beneath the precision, beneath the discipline, beneath the almost mechanical way he operates, there is still a man who understands the value of peace, even if he cannot fully keep it. At the same time, the world beyond Altamonte continues to move, and within it, the impact of McCall's actions begins to ripple in ways that go far beyond what we see directly. The dismantling of the Camorra operation is not just a local victory. It disrupts networks, shifts power dynamics, creates gaps that others will inevitably try to fill. And this is where the story expands from a personal journey into something larger. Because justice, as McCall understands it, is never permanent. It's temporary, fragile, constantly under threat. And that truth is what separates him from traditional heroes. He doesn't believe in winning. He believes in balancing. And balance is something that must be maintained over and over again, in different places, under different circumstances. Emma Collins, now operating with a deeper understanding of the world she's part of, becomes a reflection of that idea. She represents the system trying to function, trying to adapt, trying to keep order through official channels. But she also understands now that the system has limits. That there are moments when rules are not enough, when structure fails, when someone like McCall becomes necessary. And that realization changes her. It doesn't turn her into him. It aligns her with the idea that justice is not always clean, not always visible, and not always recognized. As McCall quietly prepares to move on, leaving Altamonte behind not because he wants to, but because he understands that staying would mean becoming something else entirely, the story reaches a point that feels complete yet open at the same time. Because this is not an ending in the traditional sense, it's a continuation of a cycle. Somewhere, something is already beginning to break. Somewhere, someone is already losing hope. And whether he seeks it or not, Robert McCall will find his way there. Not as a hero, not as a legend, but as what he has always been. The Equalizer. The quiet that settles over Altamonte in the days following Vincent Quaranta's fall is deceptive. To an outsider, the village appears unchanged. Children still run through narrow streets, merchants still call out their wares, the scent of fresh bread still drifts from small bakeries. Yet beneath this veneer, a subtle tension hums, a reminder that darkness never fully retreats. Robert McCall moves among the townspeople with the same deliberate calm that defines him, but his eyes register every anomaly, every shadow, every potential threat. Years of experience have taught him that evil is patient, that chaos often simmers where life appears serene. He does not allow himself comfort, for he knows that peace, however precious, is always borrowed. Each moment of quiet is an opportunity to observe, to plan, to prepare, for balance is never static, and equilibrium must be enforced even in its absence. McCall's nights are long and solitary. He reflects on the series of events that brought him here, from the deadly confrontation at the Sicilian winery to the destruction of the Quaranta Empire. Each victory, each life spared, carries weight, and he carries it alone. The faces of those he saved, Gio Benucci's family, Angelo the shopkeeper, even the anonymous villagers, haunt him not in fear but in responsibility. They are reminders that his actions ripple far beyond the immediate moment of violence. He understands that justice is not just the punishment of the guilty but the protection and preservation of the innocent. Each choice he has made, each strike delivered, has preserved a small sphere of life within the vast chaos of the world, and that responsibility is both a gift and a burden he cannot relinquish. Meanwhile, Emma Collins navigates her evolving role in the CIA. Her promotion is significant, but it is tempered by understanding the limitations of institutional power. She has witnessed firsthand the impact of one man acting decisively outside bureaucratic constraints, and it shapes her perspective profoundly. In quiet moments, she reflects on the lessons McCall has imparted without words: precision, patience, and the moral courage to act when the system falters. She is learning that law and order are tools, not guarantees, that human life is a delicate balance of agency and vulnerability. These insights deepen her resolve, but they also carry an unspoken weight, the knowledge that interventions like McCall's, though necessary, are exceptions rather than rules. Justice, she realizes, is often messy, brutal, and deeply personal, demanding more than legal precedent or procedural correctness. Back in Altamonte, the villagers themselves begin to feel the subtle shift McCall has imposed. Trust begins to rebuild, children play more freely, merchants take greater pride in their work, and the market square thrums with cautious optimism. Yet, there remains an unspoken understanding. The presence of a protector is ephemeral, and safety is a fleeting concept. McCall is both there and not there, an invisible guardian whose influence is felt rather than acknowledged. His interventions have created space for life to flourish, but he does not participate in that flourishing. He walks through the village streets like a shadow, offering reassurance while maintaining distance, a constant reminder that equilibrium is maintained through vigilance, not celebration. This duality, the power to protect and the isolation that power demands, is the essence of his existence, the burden that accompanies the mantle of the Equalizer. The action of recent weeks has left McCall contemplative about mortality and the inevitability of consequence. He considers not only the lives saved but the lives changed, the chains of cause and effect that follow each deliberate action. He thinks of Vincent Quaranta, once confident and untouchable, now gone, and Marco, whose ruthlessness could not withstand the precision of a disciplined hand. These reflections extend to his own mortality, the understanding that every mission carries the potential for finality. In this awareness, he finds neither fear nor regret, only clarity. Death is an eventual certainty, but how one exercises life, how one chooses to act in the face of injustice, defines legacy, shapes the world, and influences those who follow. For McCall, legacy is silent, uncelebrated, yet tangible in the survival and continued hope of those he protects. As the story arcs toward its emotional climax, Altamonte itself becomes a character. Its narrow alleyways, sun-drenched plazas, and terraced vineyards are imbued with narrative weight. Every footstep McCall takes, every interaction with villagers, every quiet gesture of assistance is layered with thematic resonance. The triumph of courage over oppression, the enduring necessity of vigilance, the interplay between violence and moral duty. McCall's presence in Altamonte, though understated, transforms the village from a passive backdrop into a living testament of resilience. Each act of protection and intervention reinforces the underlying principle that true justice requires both action and restraint, discernment and precision. The denouement is subtle but profound. The Camorra's immediate threat has been neutralized, yet the story resists tidy resolution. McCall's philosophy of equilibrium underscores that evil may be vanquished temporarily, but the struggle against chaos is unending. The villagers continue their lives, unaware of the full extent of the sacrifices made for their safety, while McCall remains a silent sentinel, observing, contemplating, and preparing for whatever arises next. Through him, the narrative emphasizes that heroism is neither performative nor celebrated. It is the quiet, disciplined execution of moral responsibility, carried out consistently in a world that rarely acknowledges its necessity. In the final moments, McCall watches a football match in Altamonte's central square, the townspeople's laughter and cheers juxtaposed against his solitary reflection. The victory is theirs, yet its preservation owes itself to unseen forces, to precise interventions, to the disciplined hand of a man who has dedicated his life to maintaining balance in the face of relentless disorder. The Equalizer is not an identity worn for recognition. It is a principle enacted, a force imposed with conscience and skill. Robert McCall embodies this truth in its most profound form, a guardian whose actions reverberate through lives and landscapes alike, leaving a legacy of justice, hope, and measured equilibrium long after he has departed from immediate view. Life in Altamonte begins to stabilize under McCall's subtle guidance, yet beneath the calm, threads of tension remain taut. He moves through the village with a practiced ease, observing patterns of behavior, monitoring anomalies, and anticipating potential threats before they manifest. McCall knows that equilibrium is fragile and requires constant maintenance. A casual glance at a shopkeeper's hesitant step, a child's wary glance toward a shadowed street, or the almost imperceptible pause in a passerby's gait, all of these are data points, signals of the environment's latent instability. McCall's experience has honed him to interpret these signs with precision. He is attuned to the world in a way that most people cannot comprehend, and he uses that attunement not for personal gain, but to impose a measure of justice and protection that no law enforcement structure could replicate. As the villagers regain confidence, McCall's interventions shift from overt acts of violence to subtle influence. He counsels Gio Benucci on strategic vigilance, advising how to monitor criminal patterns without escalating conflict. He discreetly repairs structural weaknesses in the town, like securing pathways that could provide criminals a tactical advantage, or rearranging public spaces to enhance communal oversight. Each action is executed with restraint, ensuring that his presence is almost invisible, yet profoundly impactful. Through these measures, the townspeople begin to internalize the principles McCall embodies: self-reliance, situational awareness, and the moral imperative to act decisively when necessary. It is not hero worship that he fosters, but empowerment rooted in knowledge and preparedness, a quiet cultivation of resilience that will endure long after his interventions are complete. Meanwhile, the CIA's engagement with Altamonte deepens. Emma Collins, having risen in rank due to her decisive actions alongside McCall, continues to uncover remnants of the Quaranta network. She shares intelligence with McCall in encrypted communications, enabling him to act with precision while minimizing collateral exposure. Their relationship evolves into one of mutual respect and trust, though professional boundaries remain intact. Collins is beginning to internalize McCall's philosophy of measured intervention, the understanding that bureaucratic systems are often too slow to confront imminent threats, and that human lives demand immediate, morally guided action. McCall, in turn, observes her growth with quiet satisfaction. He recognizes that his influence extends beyond the immediate protection of Altamonte, shaping a capable agent whose ethical judgment and operational skill will continue the work he has begun. Yet, peace in Altamonte is deceptive. Residual Camorra elements linger on the outskirts, assessing the village, waiting for any sign of weakness to exploit. McCall anticipates this, understanding that criminal networks are patient, opportunistic, and ruthless. Small signs, a vehicle parked too long near the village perimeter, unfamiliar faces loitering at night, whispered communications intercepted by Geo, serve as early warnings. McCall devises subtle countermeasures, nighttime patrols conducted by trusted locals, strategic placements of observers, and covert surveillance that leverages the villagers' natural familiarity with their surroundings. Each precaution is calculated to deter, rather than provoke, preserving the illusion of normalcy while ensuring that any aggression is met with overwhelming precision. Amid this vigilance, McCall also confronts moral reflection. He contemplates the consequences of his interventions, the lives he has altered or ended, and the ethical weight of taking unilateral action. Unlike conventional law enforcement, his justice is absolute, immediate, and untempered by legal procedures. This reality is both liberating and isolating. While his actions save lives and protect communities, they also impose a solitary burden that he bears without acknowledgement or solace. In quiet moments, he imagines alternate scenarios, paths not taken, lives left unaltered, consequences avoided. These reflections deepen his resolve, reinforcing the discipline, restraint, and calculated decisiveness required to navigate a world where moral clarity is rare and the cost of hesitation is death. By dawn, Altamonte awakens to its quiet normality, unaware of the immediate danger that has passed. McCall, having completed his task, observes from a high vantage point, the terraced village bathed in early light, the villagers moving through their routines. He reflects on the delicate balance he has preserved, the equilibrium that demands constant vigilance, and the moral clarity required to enforce it. His role as the equalizer is both enduring and invisible, a silent, disciplined force shaping the safety, hope, and stability of a community while remaining apart from it. The sun had barely risen over the jagged cliffs of Altamonte when McCall returned to the town center, moving silently among the villagers, unnoticed yet fully aware of every movement, every whisper. The prior night's covert operation had eliminated one immediate threat, but the undercurrent of danger remained palpable. Criminal networks, he knew, did not dissolve with a single strike. They adapted, observed, and bided their time. Every face on the street, every car that lingered too long, could represent a potential vector for chaos. McCall's eyes, trained through years of military and covert operations, absorbed the minutiae, the pattern of shopkeepers opening their stores, children running along the cobblestones, Geo adjusting the patrol routes of local volunteers. These details, ordinary to others, provided a mosaic of potential vulnerabilities, a living map of Altamonte's fragility and resilience. He paused briefly at the cafe where Angelo had once stood helpless under the Camorra's intimidation. The man now served espresso with a confident hand, unaware of the full measure of McCall's protection. McCall allowed himself a momentary satisfaction, not from pride, but from witnessing the restoration of normalcy. This equilibrium was delicate. One misstep could unravel it entirely. Yet he knew that his interventions were most effective when invisible. His role was not that of a celebrated hero, but a silent guardian shaping the town's survival. A group of youths, emboldened by recent victories, laughed at a nearby fountain, testing their limits in small, calculated risks. McCall observed, noting who hesitated, who acted rashly, who followed instinctively. These observations were not idle, they were lessons in human behavior, crucial for anticipating future threats and guiding the community towards subtle self-reliance. Meanwhile, Collins, still recovering from the car bombing orchestrated by Vincent Quaranta, resumed her work from a hospital room. Despite physical weakness, her mind remained razor-sharp. McCall had ensured that intelligence flows remained uninterrupted, providing her with precise data and contextual analysis. Through encrypted channels, they exchanged concise, tactical communication, sharing updates on Camorra movements, potential recruits, and economic leverage points within Altamont. The coordination was seamless, blending McCall's field precision with Colin's analytical capacity. Their partnership reflected a mutual understanding. The world they operated within required both action and foresight, decisiveness and patience, lethal precision and ethical restraint. Collins, inspired by McCall's example, began to internalize his philosophy, seeing the balance between immediate justice and long-term stability. The tension escalated when McCall intercepted a message about the arrival of a Camorra lieutenant from Naples, intent on reclaiming lost ground and establishing dominance in Altamont. McCall's calculations were swift. The lieutenant would arrive under cover of darkness, relying on local knowledge and informants to avoid detection. McCall moved preemptively, setting subtle traps, manipulating perception, and leveraging the village's natural geography to create defensive advantages without alarming the townspeople. Every alley, stairway, and rooftop became a strategic asset. He coordinated with Geo, advising him to maintain routine patrols while subtly enhancing surveillance in critical areas. McCall's interventions were surgical. Lethal force remained an option but was reserved for unavoidable confrontation. That night, shadows stretched across the narrow streets of Altamont. McCall observed from a rooftop, his presence masked by the faint glow of lanterns and the distant roar of the sea. The Camorra lieutenant, flanked by 2 henchmen, moved through the streets, unaware that every step was anticipated. McCall neutralized the first 2 threats quietly, leaving no trace of his involvement. The lieutenant, believing he was in control, approached the central plaza, only to find the layout subtly altered, an ambush disguised as ordinary terrain. McCall emerged from the darkness with calculated speed, incapacitating the lieutenant with precision strikes, leaving him unconscious rather than dead, a living warning for the remaining factions. Every move was deliberate. The message was clear. Altamonte would not be dominated through fear or violence. In the aftermath, the town remained blissfully unaware of the immediate danger they had narrowly escaped. Children played in the square, shopkeepers reopened for morning business, and the smell of fresh bread and sea air filled the streets. McCall retreated to a vantage point overlooking the town, watching the ebb and flow of daily life. The balance he maintained was subtle yet profound, the kind of influence invisible to the casual observer but deeply consequential. He reflected on the ethical weight of his actions, the line between justice and vengeance, intervention and interference. Each decision carried consequences, and each choice reinforced the principle that true power lay in control tempered by morality. Yet, McCall's solitude remained unbroken. The moral clarity he exercised came with isolation, a necessity born from the nature of his work. Human connections were fleeting, fragile, and often dangerous. The townspeople's trust was limited to surface interactions. His deeper intentions remained concealed. Even Collins, with whom he shared mutual respect and tactical synergy, remained professionally distant. McCall understood that intimacy could compromise mission integrity and that attachment carried risk. Still, he acknowledged subtle emotional bonds, the quiet gratitude of Gio, the tentative trust of Angelo, the innocent curiosity of the village children. These relationships, though understated, provided a human dimension to his otherwise calculated existence, a reminder of what he fought to preserve beyond tactical outcomes. As dawn approached, a sense of calm settled over Altamont. McCall's work, at least for now, had restored a fragile equilibrium. Yet he knew that peace was temporary. Criminal networks were adaptive, relentless, and patient. His vigilance could never cease. The village, the people he had come to protect, and the principles he upheld required constant attention and unwavering discipline. McCall remained atop the cliff, eyes scanning the horizon, every detail of the town etched in his memory. His role as the Equalizer was not defined by celebration or recognition but by enduring presence, the subtle orchestration of safety and justice that allowed life to continue undisturbed. The narrative closes on a contemplative McCall, silhouetted against the rising sun, a solitary figure committed to an invisible yet profound mission. Altamonte's streets bustle with ordinary life, unaware that their continued peace rests in the hands of a man who measures morality and strategy with unparalleled precision. In this quiet yet potent conclusion, McCall embodies the philosophy that defines him. justice tempered by restraint, power exercised with responsibility, and the understanding that true heroism is often unseen yet indispensable. The days that followed were deceptively calm. Altamonte, perched on the Amalfi coast, radiated an air of tranquil normalcy. The markets opened on time, the children laughed along the narrow cobbled streets, and the scent of baking bread mingled with salt from the sea. Yet beneath this veneer, McCall remained acutely aware of lingering threats. The Camorra were patient predators. Their defeat of Marco and Vincent Quaranta did not erase their desire for revenge or influence. Criminal enterprises did not vanish. They mutated, regrouped, and sought new opportunities. McCall's eyes scanned the horizon constantly, his senses finely tuned to the subtlest disturbances. A courier moving too swiftly, a car parked in unusual proximity to a residence, the hushed tones of villagers whispering about outsiders. Every small anomaly was a potential thread to unravel, and he monitored them meticulously. In his temporary sanctuary, McCall reviewed intelligence reports and intercepted communications, comparing patterns of Camorra activity to local economic behaviors and social interactions. Collins, now partially recovered, remained an invaluable ally, providing real-time intelligence and predictive analysis. They developed a system, McCall in the field, observing and intervening directly, while Collins coordinated with international intelligence networks to preempt logistical and financial moves by criminal actors. Their coordination was seamless, a combination of instinctive fieldcraft and methodical data analysis. McCall recognized the delicate balance between action and subtlety. Direct confrontation was necessary only when indirect measures failed. Altamonte had to feel autonomous. The villagers needed to believe they controlled their own destiny, while he orchestrated events invisibly from the margins. One evening, as twilight deepened over the Amalfi cliffs, McCall intercepted reports of a minor Camorra cell attempting to smuggle narcotics through the village harbor. The operation was small-scale, intended to test remaining influence and probe the town's defenses. McCall acted with surgical precision. Under the cover of darkness, he disabled the cell's vehicles and neutralized the immediate threats without alerting the town. The smuggler leaders were incapacitated but left alive, a calculated decision to instill caution without unnecessary bloodshed. When the villagers later discovered the overturned vehicles and abandoned equipment, they attributed it to a simple local accident, preserving their sense of safety and normalcy. McCall understood that perception was as powerful as force. Fear could destabilize a community just as efficiently as violence. Meanwhile, Gio Benucci, inspired by McCall's discipline and ethics, began to reorganize the village's defense protocols. He established discreet watch systems, coordinated volunteer patrols, and engaged the townspeople in minor but meaningful security measures. McCall observed from the periphery, occasionally stepping in to correct tactical miscalculations or prevent unnecessary risk. His presence was both shield and educator. Every action he took reinforced the principles of vigilance, measured response, and ethical restraint. Through Gio, McCall instilled a subtle culture of self-reliance, ensuring that the town could maintain safety in his eventual absence. Tensions escalated when a message arrived indicating that one of Vincent Quaranta's external contacts was planning to reassert influence in southern Italy by consolidating fragmented criminal cells. The message was indirect, encoded in courier communications, yet McCall deciphered the intent immediately. Any resurgence could destabilize Altamonte and undo months of careful preparation. McCall mapped the likely points of approach, anticipating routes and safe houses. Using the town's geography and social dynamics as his framework, he formulated a multi-layered strategy: containment, observation, and selective intervention. This approach emphasized non-lethal disruption wherever possible, reserving direct confrontation for imminent threats. Late at night, McCall patrolled the outskirts of Altamonte alone, blending with shadows, each footstep silent on the stone pathways. The wind carried faint whispers of the sea, masking the subtle noises of approaching threats. Two figures attempted to infiltrate the village perimeter, testing defenses. McCall intercepted them with methodical precision. A swift incapacitation of one, a strategic disarmament of the other, leaving both alive but disoriented. The operation sent a clear signal to external actors. Altamonte's equilibrium would not be easily disturbed. The lesson was implicit. The village was under the protection of a force both unseen and inexorably precise. Back in his quarters, McCall reflected on the ethical weight of his interventions. Each choice was deliberate, balancing the imperatives of justice, restraint, and effectiveness. He considered the implications of leaving the town fully autonomous versus the necessity of continued vigilance. Collins' updates provided reassurance that his actions had broader impact. International intelligence agencies were monitoring the ripple effects of his operations, ensuring that the Camorra's capabilities were contained beyond the village. The equilibrium McCall maintained extended into a wider geopolitical context, where individual acts of precision could prevent large-scale violence and protect countless lives. As dawn approached, McCall ascended the highest vantage point overlooking Altamont. From this position, he observed the village slowly coming to life. Smoke rising from chimneys, merchants arranging stalls, children running barefoot along the streets. Every detail was a testament to the fragile balance he protected. The sun crested the horizon, illuminating the town in warm light, masking the potential threats still lurking in shadow. McCall's mission was not defined by dramatic victories, but by the silent, continuous orchestration of safety and justice. Altamonte flourished under his vigilance, unaware that a single man's calculated interventions had preserved their lives and livelihoods. The narrative tension remained, however, for McCall knew that true equilibrium was fleeting. Criminal organizations were persistent, opportunistic, and ruthless. His vigilance, while thorough, could not become complacent. Every day, every decision reinforced the principle that security required constant adaptation, awareness, and moral clarity. McCall's work was far from over, yet his presence had established a culture of resilience and subtle self-reliance among the villagers, a legacy that would endure even in his eventual absence. The following days brought a subtle shift in Altamonte's atmosphere. On the surface, life remained idyllic. Fishermen returned with the morning catch, bakery ovens puffed aromatic clouds of bread into narrow alleys, and the children's laughter echoed against the pastel-colored facades. Yet McCall felt the undercurrents of tension tightening around the town. Even in his absence, rumors of Vincent Quaranta's surviving allies and distant Camorra factions circulated like invisible currents, threatening to infiltrate the fragile calm. Criminals were opportunists, experts at exploiting complacency, and McCall knew the equilibrium he had crafted required constant vigilance. He was no longer merely protecting the town from immediate threats. He was orchestrating a delicate defense against those who sought to destabilize it from afar. One evening, as twilight drenched the cobbled streets in gold and shadow, McCall convened a discreet council with Gio and a few trusted villagers. Their discussion was calm but focused. Minor Camorra cells were attempting to establish footholds in neighboring towns, and intelligence suggested Altamonte could soon be targeted again. McCall outlined an intricate system of surveillance and countermeasures. He assigned strategic roles to villagers capable of handling responsibilities without drawing attention to themselves. Angelo managed supply routes, and local artisans served as informal scouts, reporting unusual visitors or suspicious activities. McCall's philosophy was clear. A community empowered to detect and respond to threats collectively was far more resilient than one reliant solely on his intervention. Meanwhile, Collins monitored encrypted communications from Italy to distant Camorra operatives. Each intercepted message revealed the methodical approach of criminal factions attempting to regain lost influence. McCall and Collins worked in tandem. She would analyze patterns while he orchestrated interventions in the field. Every encounter required precision, both tactical and ethical. McCall avoided unnecessary violence, neutralizing threats in ways that maintained the town's sense of security and autonomy. Even when faced with aggressive actors testing Altamonte's defenses, he demonstrated restraint, ensuring the villagers never saw him as a savior to idolize but rather as a protective force acting just beyond perception. Tensions escalated when a group of armed men appeared near the village outskirts, posing as smugglers seeking passage to the coast. McCall tracked their movements silently, blending into shadows with a predator's awareness. As they attempted to infiltrate Altamonte under cover of night, he intervened surgically, disarming one, incapacitating another with precise strikes, leaving the remaining men alive but disoriented. The message was unspoken yet undeniable. Altamonte's defenses were invisible, unwavering, and lethal if challenged. The town awoke the next morning to find signs of the confrontation but without violence being evident. No deaths, no overt destruction, only disrupted plans. McCall's method preserved both life and the villagers' sense of safety, a delicate balance few could achieve. During this period, McCall deepened his understanding of the town's social fabric. He observed the interactions of families, tracked the flow of daily commerce, and noted the subtle exchanges of information between residents. Through these observations, he reinforced a network of informal communication channels that allowed the villagers to relay intelligence quickly and discreetly. Each minor adjustment, shifting patrol times, repositioning lookout points, or adjusting supply storage, enhanced the town's resilience. McCall's interventions were invisible yet tangible, shaping the village into a bastion of vigilance that could withstand subtle threats without succumbing to fear. One afternoon, McCall received a coded warning from Collins indicating that Vincent Quaranta's distant associates were planning a coordinated assault on multiple coastal towns. Altamonte would be a primary target, and the operation was imminent. McCall moved swiftly, deploying preventive measures with precision. The villagers, trained to act without panic, executed contingency plans they had rehearsed discreetly. Boats were repositioned, supply lines secured, and perimeter watch rotations intensified. The plan was meticulous: neutralize threats before they fully materialized, ensuring no collateral damage and minimal risk to civilians. Every action demonstrated McCall's philosophy: justice enforced with intelligence, not recklessness. That night, McCall took a solitary patrol along the cliffs overlooking Altamont. The sea reflected the moonlight, a calm contrast to the anticipation of conflict. Two men attempting to survey the town for a future assault were intercepted with silent efficiency. Incapacitated and restrained, they were left in a location where authorities could safely discover them the following day. McCall returned to his quarters, knowing the warning they carried would ripple through the Camorra's network. His strategy had worked again: prevention through calculated force and psychological leverage. He had become an unseen architect of order, preserving the lives of those who remained oblivious to the danger he had forestalled. As the villagers celebrated the town's continued safety, McCall reflected on the weight of responsibility. Each intervention carried moral and ethical consequences. His meticulous balance of restraint and action defined his work. Even when violence was necessary, it was measured, purposeful, and confined to threats that could not be neutralized otherwise. Collins' guidance ensured that operations remained coordinated across borders, preventing the Camorra from exploiting gaps in communication. Altamonte's newfound autonomy, its ability to resist intimidation and assert resilience, was a testament to the effectiveness of silent vigilance guided by experience, intuition, and precision. Even as tranquility settled over Altamonte, McCall understood that true equilibrium was ephemeral. Criminal organizations adapted quickly, exploiting opportunities as they arose. His work was continuous, requiring constant awareness, subtle intervention, and moral clarity. Yet the town thrived under his watchful eye. Residents experienced safety, community, and a semblance of normal life, unaware that each moment of peace was carefully orchestrated by a man who had transformed vigilance into a discipline and discipline into the invisible shield that protected them. The small town of Altamonte, nestled along the rugged cliffs of southern Italy, had seemed tranquil to outsiders, but beneath its picturesque streets lay a simmering tension that Robert McCall could feel in every glance exchanged between the villagers. The Camorra's shadow loomed over the town like a storm cloud, and each family had its own tale of fear, extortion, or loss. McCall, recovering from his wound and observing the daily rhythms of the village, understood that this was not a place that could be protected by diplomacy alone. The narrow cobbled streets, the small piazzas, the local cafe where villagers gathered, all these familiar corners were potential stages for violence, but also opportunities to turn the town's fear into collective courage. As he walked past the local bakery, he noticed young children practicing football in the street, their laughter echoing off the walls, and it reminded him why he had chosen to return, why he had refused the escape into anonymity. Because these people deserved a life free from the tyranny of the Quaranta brothers, and he was willing to be the storm they didn't see coming. McCall's mornings became a calculated observation of the town's routines. He watched Gio Benucci, the local carabinier, patrol the narrow streets with his understated authority, taking note of who was obedient out of respect and who was cowed by fear. Each encounter, each glance, became a thread in a web McCall began to weave, preparing for the confrontation he knew was inevitable. At the same time, McCall made contact with Emma Collins, discreetly and carefully. Her CIA training made her cautious, but McCall's reputation preceded him. Assessed risk, anticipated moves, and acted without hesitation. Their coordination grew, subtle and quiet, like two chess masters plotting a complex game against an enemy who believed themselves invincible. Meanwhile, the Quaranta brothers, Vincent and Marco, grew increasingly brazen, their impatience with local resistance igniting violent outbursts that McCall documented silently, his mind cataloging every pattern, every weakness, every human flaw that would later become a weapon in his hands. The first major confrontation came as a warning to the town. Marco Quaranta, eager to display his dominance, targeted Angelo, the local fish store owner, demanding extortion payments with threats so explicit that they left the entire piazza trembling. When Angelo refused, Marco's men firebombed the store, sending flames licking against the neighboring buildings, smoke curling into the pale Sicilian sky. The townspeople watched, paralyzed with fear, their lives on hold as their livelihoods burned. McCall, witnessing the scene from a shadowed alley, did not hesitate. That night, under the cover of darkness, he moved with calculated efficiency, tracking the henchmen responsible, neutralizing them silently, leaving no trace but the echo of fear for those who had oppressed the town. Each act was precise, each movement purposeful, designed not to punish indiscriminately but to send a message. The era of unchecked violence had ended, and a new force had arrived in Altamonte, one that played by a code the Quaranta brothers could not understand, a code defined by justice and calculated retribution. This series of escalating events began to shift the dynamic in the town. Villagers who had once cowered behind closed doors now whispered of courage, of McCall's presence as a shield against tyranny. Gio, recovering from the brutal attack on his family, began to see McCall not as a foreign interloper, but as an instrument through which justice could be reclaimed. Meanwhile, the Quaranta brothers convened in their Naples stronghold, unaware that the calm, aging Marine they had underestimated was already dismantling their operations step by step. Their arrogance blinded them to the reality that McCall was not just reacting, he was orchestrating a methodical campaign, striking precisely where they were most vulnerable. Each death, each act of sabotage, each strategic move forced Vincent and Marco to question their invincibility, to realize that their reign over Altamonte was fragile, their cruelty a liability they could no longer sustain. And yet, McCall remained invisible to them, a ghost who left devastation in his wake, a calculated storm that the Camorra had never anticipated, and as Altamonte began to glimpse a future free from fear, McCall prepared for the inevitable confrontation that would determine not only the town's fate but the end of the Quaranta brothers' empire once and for all. The Amalfi coast was bathed in the soft, golden light of early morning, the waves below crashing gently against the rugged cliffs. Robert McCall, retired U.S. Marine and former DIA operative, drove along the narrow coastal roads, the memory of the Sicilian winery ambush heavy in his mind. He had killed Lorenzo Vitali and his henchmen, securing the key to the vault where the stolen money from the cyber heist was kept, but the reprisal had been swift. Vitali's grandson had shot him in the back before he could escape. Pain lanced through his body, yet amidst the shock and the lingering taste of mortality, a clarity formed. This was not the time for despair. The world was messy, unfair, filled with evil, but it was his skill, his discipline, and his sense of justice that could tip the balance. With determination, McCall staggered to the ferry that would take him back to the mainland, each step a test of his endurance and will. The journey to Altamonte was grueling, McCall slipped in and out of consciousness as the adrenaline and blood loss contended for dominance over his body. Gio Benucci, a local carabinier, spotted the near-lifeless figure along the Amalfi Road and acted without hesitation, carrying McCall to the safety of his home and summoning Dr. Enzo Arrizio to stabilize him. As McCall recovered, his eyes adjusted not just to the sunlight but to the rhythm of the village. Altamonte was small, a coastal Italian town where life moved at its own deliberate pace, and yet beneath the surface, tension lingered. The villagers lived under the shadow of the Camorra, local mafia figures who manipulated and intimidated them, exploiting the fragile economy and the people's desire to maintain their ancestral homes. McCall, observing quietly from the periphery, understood immediately the stakes and the nature of the threat. This town needed someone who could act decisively, someone willing to walk the line between justice and vengeance without hesitation. Days passed as McCall regained his strength. He became familiar with the townspeople, from shopkeepers to children laughing in the piazza, and each interaction solidified a growing attachment to the village and its people. Through careful observation, he noted the subtle signs of intimidation. A broken window here, a late-night visit by an enforcer there, whispers of extortion and threats disguised as advice. The Camorra brothers, Vincent and Marco Quaranta, exercised influence with both fear and force, and McCall's patience allowed him to gather intelligence while avoiding direct confrontation. An anonymous tip to CIA officer Emma Collins revealed the clandestine role of the winery in the drug trade. Collins and her team uncovered the stashed cash and the bags of phenethylene tablets, confirming the network that threatened the town. Though distant, McCall's connection with Collins symbolized the intersection of local courage and global vigilance, an unseen web where information and action converged. It was during one quiet afternoon, while walking past a sun-drenched alley lined with flowering bougainvillea, that McCall overheard Marco pressuring Angelo, a local fishmonger, for payments. The threat was clear, the intimidation deliberate. A few nights later, Angelo's store was firebombed, a brutal warning to the villagers. McCall watched the event unfold from the shadows, noting the reactions of the townspeople, shock, fear, helplessness, and felt a familiar surge of purpose. He could not stand idle. Gio Benucci, attempting to confront the violence legally, faced resistance within his own ranks, revealing the corruption that protected the Camorra's operations. McCall knew that only decisive, strategic action could protect the innocent and restore balance to Altamont. The stage was set, the players in place, and McCall prepared for the calculated storm that would follow, each move meticulously planned in his mind like a chess game where every piece mattered and failure carried a human cost. The villagers of Altamont had gathered in the piazza, their faces a mix of fear and defiance, as Vincent Quaranta, flanked by his henchmen, stepped into the center with the swagger of someone used to commanding obedience through intimidation. Gio Benucci stood by helplessly, knowing the lives of his wife and daughter hung in the balance, a cruel leverage designed to break his spirit. McCall, emerging from the shadows with quiet authority, assessed the situation. The weight of responsibility rested not just on his shoulders, but on the fragile courage of the villagers who had been forced into silence for too long. He understood that fear could only hold them for so long, but action, swift and precise, could ignite hope. Vincent's voice, cold and authoritative, cut through the stillness. He demanded that Gio identify Marco's killer, the very man who had dared to challenge the Camorra's grip over the town. Cameras and phones in the hands of the villagers captured every word, every threatening gesture, an unintentional archive of tyranny. McCall did not respond immediately. He let Vincent's words hang in the air like a challenge. The crowd murmured, sensing that the balance was about to shift. Then, with calm resolve, McCall stepped forward, revealing himself as the one responsible. The shock on Vincent's face was mirrored by a ripple of courage through the villagers, who, emboldened, began to record and protest openly. Vincent, realizing his dominance was slipping, retreated, signaling his men to regroup, the threat far from neutralized but temporarily stalled. Night fell over Altamonte, and the quiet streets belied the storm of action that was about to erupt. McCall knew that the only way to protect the villagers permanently was to confront Vincent directly, to dismantle his operations at their source. The Quaranta mansion, heavily guarded, became the stage for McCall's methodical precision. Slipping through shadows, he neutralized the guards one by one, a dance of lethal efficiency honed through years of discipline and combat. Each step, each strike, was deliberate, aimed at incapacitation with minimal noise, minimizing the risk to both himself and the unknowing civilians nearby. The mansion, opulent yet corrupt, reflected the wealth built on fear and crime, a gilded cage for a man whose power was derived from terror. In the mansion's dimly lit corridors, Vincent's arrogance became his vulnerability. McCall confronted him with a calm intensity, administering a lethal dose of the very drugs that had fueled Vincent's criminal empire across Europe. The act was not just retribution, it was symbolic justice, a methodical end to a reign built on exploitation. Outside, the villagers remained unaware of the exact proceedings, but the tension in the air was palpable, a prelude to the liberation that was quietly being orchestrated within their town. Through a network of contacts and careful timing, McCall ensured that the money he had retrieved from the Sicilian winery returned to its rightful owners, elderly citizens whose pensions had been stolen, a subtle, yet powerful act of restorative justice. By dawn, Altamonte was waking to a new reality. The immediate threat had been neutralized, yet the village's liberation was not a quiet victory. Word spread quickly of McCall's intervention, his reputation blending myth and fact among the people. CIA officer Emma Collins, who had been instrumental in coordinating intelligence remotely, received recognition for her role in dismantling the Altamonte drug trade. McCall, ever the unseen guardian, left a personal note alongside a book of contacts, revealing a connection deeper than she had realized. She was the daughter of McCall's late friend and colleague, Susan Plummer. This revelation intertwined personal history with the narrative of justice, adding layers to the moral stakes of the confrontation. The final scenes in Altamonte were both celebratory and reflective. Villagers cheered their local football team's victory, a symbolic return to normalcy and community cohesion, while McCall stood apart, observing quietly. His work was never about glory or recognition. It was about restoring balance, about protecting the vulnerable from those who sought to exploit them. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, McCall's presence became a silent reassurance, a guardian figure whose actions transcended mere violence, embodying a relentless pursuit of justice in a world that often rewarded cruelty. With the Quaranta threat eliminated and the mansion emptied of its corruption, Altamonte slowly exhaled, a town released from the suffocating grip of fear. McCall, always meticulous, ensured that every loose end was addressed. He transferred the stolen winery funds back to the elderly couple, a small act that restored not only their finances but their dignity, a gesture emblematic of McCall's philosophy. Justice is not just punishment, it is restoration. Emma Collins, recovering in the hospital from the attempted bombing, received the package McCall had sent, a book of contacts and the revelation of her mother's legacy. The emotional weight of discovering her connection to McCall's past intertwined with her own actions, creating a personal stake in the fight against crime and injustice that transcended professional duty. She understood now that her mother's values, mirrored in McCall, had been the guiding principle behind the covert interventions that had saved so many lives. The villagers, sensing change in the air, began reclaiming the streets, reopening shops, and repairing homes damaged by extortion and violence. They spoke in hushed tones of McCall, not just as a man but as a symbol of hope, a mythic figure whose intervention had shifted the balance of power. Gio Benucci, though physically recovering, carried the emotional scars of his family's ordeal. McCall spent time with him, imparting quiet lessons on vigilance, strategy, and the importance of moral courage. They walked the winding streets of Altamonte, observing the town's slow revival, the resilience of the people mirrored in their small victories. McCall's methods were precise, surgical, and devoid of spectacle, yet the impact was transformative, embedding an enduring sense of empowerment within the community. In Naples, Vincent's surviving allies regrouped, but McCall's actions had dismantled the core of their operation. Reports of intercepted communications, disrupted shipments, and dismantled drug networks reached the higher echelons of law enforcement and intelligence. The Quaranta Empire was crumbling, its leaders either eliminated or incapacitated, and its remaining influence dissipating rapidly. McCall, ever the ghostly guardian, did not linger to witness the final collapse. His presence in Altamonte had been decisive, enough to tip the scales without requiring continued oversight. By removing the centralized threat, he had allowed local governance and law enforcement, including Gio and his colleagues, to reclaim control and maintain order. The narrative thread of McCall's vigilante justice extended beyond mere action. His interventions were deliberate, with foresight and moral clarity. By the coast, he observed the simple joys of life resuming: children playing in the piazza, fishermen mending nets, families dining together without the shadow of fear looming over them. Collins, now fully aware of her mother's legacy and McCall's unwavering ethics, stood beside him briefly before returning to her official duties, carrying forward lessons of courage, discretion, and moral integrity. McCall, always transient, prepared to leave the town, understanding that his mission was not permanence but restoration of agency to those who had been oppressed. The closing moments saw McCall walking along the cliffs overlooking the Mediterranean, the sun casting a golden sheen on the water. His mind reflected on the cost of justice, the lives affected, and the invisible threads connecting people through acts of courage and protection. In Altamonte, life resumed with a new rhythm, a testament to the impact of a single, determined individual willing to challenge entrenched evil. The Equalizer, as always, remained a silent guardian, a shadow whose presence was felt more than seen, embodying the principle that true justice does not require acknowledgement, only results. With the town liberated and the criminal threat neutralized, McCall's journey, while temporarily paused, hinted at future missions, future confrontations, and the ongoing balance between darkness and light that defined his existence. Altamonte basked in its newfound freedom, yet the echoes of the Quaranta brothers' reign lingered like shadows at the edges of its cobblestone streets. Even with Vincent and Marco eliminated, the town had been scarred, shops burned, homes damaged, families traumatized, and McCall understood that justice was not only about stopping the perpetrators but also helping the survivors reclaim their lives. He walked through the marketplace, observing people trading cautiously at first, their conversations tentative, but gradually returning to the rhythm of ordinary life. Every smile, every laugh, every small act of daily routine felt like a quiet victory, proof that resilience could outlast fear when courage met opportunity. McCall's interventions had been violent yet surgical, leaving the criminal structure dismantled but the town itself intact. A rare precision in a world where justice often comes at indiscriminate cost. Emma Collins, now more confident in her abilities and strengthened by her personal connection to McCall's past, began implementing reforms within the CIA, leveraging the intelligence gathered from McCall's tip-offs to dismantle broader criminal networks. The success in Altamonte became a case study in calculated intervention and ethical enforcement, demonstrating that intelligence and discretion could achieve results more enduring than brute force alone. Meanwhile, Gio Benucci, deeply moved by McCall's mentorship and the townspeople's resilience, took on a proactive role, establishing new community programs to prevent future extortion and to strengthen civic trust. His relationship with the town had changed. He was no longer just an enforcer of the law but a guardian of hope, carrying forward the lessons McCall had imparted: courage, vigilance, and moral clarity. Even as peace settled, McCall remained vigilant. Shadows of the criminal underworld still moved quietly across Europe, testing the limits of law and morality. Reports of drug shipments intercepted in Naples and intelligence on residual Camorra operations suggested that while the major threat had been neutralized, smaller, opportunistic factions were eager to reclaim lost ground. McCall, ever methodical, reviewed the patterns of these operations, noting weak points and potential interventions. He understood that the cycle of crime and retribution was never truly complete, yet he embraced the responsibility of stepping in where others could not, or would not, intervene. His work, though often invisible, ensured that the balance of power remained tilted toward justice, a quiet testament to the effectiveness of a single, determined individual acting with precision and unwavering ethics. The villagers of Altamonte, unaware of the full extent of McCall's interventions, celebrated their regained independence with festivals, soccer matches, and gatherings in the town square. Each celebration reinforced community bonds, the wounds of the past slowly healing through shared experiences and collective resilience. McCall observed from a distance, a silent guardian content with his work but ever aware that the world beyond Altamonte still harbored threats. Emma Collins' newfound understanding of her mother's legacy and McCall's principles ensured that his influence would ripple beyond immediate actions, inspiring ethical vigilance in future generations. In this way, McCall's mission extended far beyond Altamonte, weaving a quiet but persistent thread of justice through lives both directly and indirectly touched by his intervention. As dusk settled along the Amalfi coast, McCall walked the cliffs once more, the Mediterranean breeze carrying with it the scent of salt and pine. He reflected on the lives he had changed, the criminals he had neutralized, and the invisible lines separating moral action from vigilantism. The quiet of the evening, the soft glow of lamplights in Altamonte, and the laughter drifting up from the piazza reminded him that his work, while unfinished, had made a tangible difference. Each act of justice reinforced the idea that courage, precision, and ethical resolve could prevail, even against formidable adversaries. And as he prepared to leave Altamonte once again, McCall carried with him not only the satisfaction of a mission accomplished but also the ever-present awareness that new challenges awaited, ones that would test his resolve, ingenuity, and commitment to being the equalizer the world needed. The calm of Altamonte had settled like a fragile veil over the town, but McCall knew that peace, especially in places scarred by fear, was never permanent. Whispers of new criminal elements trying to fill the void left by the Quaranta brothers had reached his ears through Emma Collins and Gio Benucci. Yet this time, McCall did not strike immediately. He observed, he analyzed, and he waited, understanding that true justice required patience as much as action. Every footstep in Altamonte, every exchange in the marketplace, every casual glance carried information, revealing patterns of vulnerability among those who thought they could exploit others. His mind, always calculating, began to map the invisible networks of influence, trust, and corruption, plotting interventions that would minimize collateral damage while maximizing impact. That evening, McCall convened with Collins one last time. They pored over intelligence reports, cross-referencing Camorra remnants and other European criminal movements. Emma, now fully stepping into her mother's legacy, demonstrated not only skill but moral clarity, understanding when to act and when to let patience dictate strategy. Together, they traced a network that stretched from Naples to Sicily, a lingering threat that if left unchecked could destabilize more towns like Altamont. Collins' phone buzzed with new information. A shipment of contraband was scheduled to arrive at an abandoned villa near Salerno. McCall's eyes narrowed, calculating the logistics, the risks, and the potential outcome. He knew exactly how he would proceed, precise, silent, lethal if necessary, but always leaving a path for innocence to survive. Night fell over Altamonte, casting long shadows across the piazza where children played and families shared meals, oblivious to the danger creeping in from beyond their hills. McCall moved through the streets with the quiet assurance of a man who had seen violence and chosen when it was necessary. He intercepted the first wave of operatives, neutralizing them silently, efficiently, and without panic. Each confrontation was surgical, no excess, no indulgence. By dawn, the network of threats had been systematically dismantled. The residents of Altamonte, sensing change but not fully understanding it, woke to a town that was safer than it had been the night before. McCall's presence had been felt, yet invisible, a guardian whose work was measured not in accolades but in lives preserved. With the immediate threat neutralized, McCall finally allowed himself to step back, to observe Altamonte as the town resumed its daily rhythm. Gio Benucci continued to lead the town's law enforcement and community programs with renewed vigor, while Emma Collins prepared to expand her work within the CIA, applying the lessons learned from McCall's methods to broader operations. McCall, understanding that his role was always temporary, left Altamonte under their stewardship, confident that the town would continue to thrive. Before departing, he left a discreet note for Collins, acknowledging her growth and promising that he would always remain a silent ally. The note was both a farewell and a challenge, to maintain vigilance, to act with integrity, and to remember that justice often requires sacrifice. As McCall disappeared along the winding Amalfi Coast roads, the town behind him glowed with the warmth of life restored, children's laughter echoing across the cliffs. He paused at a secluded vantage point, looking toward the horizon where the Mediterranean shimmered under the rising sun. For McCall, the fight was never truly over. There would always be new threats, new shadows, and new injustices, but he had reminded the world, in his quiet and unassuming way, that courage, precision, and moral clarity could tip the balance toward justice. And in the quiet aftermath, as he merged with the morning mist, Robert McCall remained the equalizer, a singular force against the darkness, leaving behind a legacy of resilience, hope, and the unwavering power of doing what was right, no matter the cost. Weeks had passed since the violent storm that had threatened Altamonte. The townspeople, once shackled by fear, were now slowly reclaiming their lives, infusing the cobblestone streets with laughter, music, and the smell of fresh bread from small bakeries that had survived the Quaranta's reign. McCall, always distant yet deeply observant, had taken to solitary walks along the cliffs, reflecting not just on the lives he had saved, but on the burden of a role he could never fully escape. Every action had a ripple effect, every choice a consequence, and he carried those echoes silently, like shadows trailing behind him on the winding Amalfi roads. He watched fishermen untangle their nets, children chasing stray cats, and couples pausing to share a smile, small victories in a world often overshadowed by greed and violence. Collins had returned to her duties in the CIA, now confident and resilient, her skills honed by first-hand exposure to McCall's methods. The bond between them, rooted in shared purpose and mutual respect, had deepened, yet they both understood that their paths were not meant to intersect permanently. McCall left subtle reminders for her, encrypted messages, carefully placed intelligence reports, ensuring that she could continue dismantling criminal networks with the same precision he had taught her. Meanwhile, Gio Benucci emerged as a quiet hero within Altamonte, enforcing law and order with integrity, his family safe and his spirit strengthened by McCall's intervention. The town had found a rhythm, a resilience, that promised survival even in the absence of a single guardian. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the cliffs and the sea beyond, McCall paused at the edge of a bluff. He reflected on the endless fight against injustice, understanding that his work was never truly complete, that darkness would always seek a foothold. But in the quiet moments, watching the villagers return to normalcy, he found a rare sense of satisfaction. He had reminded the world, and himself, that one person's determination, guided by principle and skill, could tip the scales, even against overwhelming odds. With a final glance at Altamonte, Robert McCall turned away, disappearing into the winding roads, leaving behind a legacy of courage, justice, and hope. His mission continued, not in the streets of a single town, but wherever injustice dared to thrive, a silent protector whose name would never need to be spoken to be remembered. The town of Altamonte slowly returned to a fragile sense of normalcy, its streets still bearing the scars of violence but filled with cautious optimism as McCall moved among the villagers with the quiet authority of someone who had already tilted the scales of fate. He observed children laughing again in the squares, elders speaking with renewed confidence, and merchants reopening their stores with tentative hope. Yet he knew that peace was a temporary veneer, a calm waiting for the inevitable tests of resilience. Gio walked beside him, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering tension, knowing that the Quaranta threat was diminished but not entirely extinguished, and that McCall's presence had been the invisible thread holding their world together. McCall's eyes scanned the horizon, calculating risks and observing behaviors, his mind already anticipating the ripple effects of the chaos he had neutralized, understanding that true safety required more than the death of violent men. It required the restoration of agency, of confidence, of courage within the community itself. Each interaction he orchestrated was subtle, a nod here, a whispered word there, and the villagers, unaware of the depth of his interventions, began to feel the empowerment that came from reclaiming their streets, their homes, their lives. Meanwhile, the remnants of the Quaranta network trembled as news of Marco and Vincent's downfall spread beyond the Amalfi Coast, undermining alliances, shaking the foundations of criminal dominance, and sending ripples of fear and uncertainty through Naples, Rome, and beyond, yet McCall's approach remained surgical, avoiding spectacle, leaving the criminals unaware of how precisely and decisively he had dismantled their operations. By evening, he had ensured that stolen funds from the winery reached the elderly couple whose pension had been decimated, leaving no trace of his presence beyond restored justice and subtle reassurance, for McCall's philosophy dictated that true heroism lay in invisible restoration, in meticulous planning, in protecting lives without glorifying himself. As twilight draped the town in amber hues and lanterns flickered across cobblestone streets, McCall surveyed Altamonte from the edge of the pier, the ocean reflecting the last traces of sunlight, knowing that his work here had restored balance but that the wider world beyond these hills still teemed with corruption, injustice, and danger, yet he would not linger, for his role was always transient, deliberate, and purposeful, leaving behind a town capable of defending itself, a community strengthened, and lives preserved by the quiet presence of a man whose name they might never speak but whose actions would echo forever in their courage, resilience, and reclaimed hope. The following days in Altamonte unfolded like a careful orchestration of tension and recovery, each moment weighted with the unspoken understanding that violence had been tempered but never fully erased, and McCall moved through the town with the steady focus of a man who measured every action against both immediate consequences and the long-term safety of the community. He visited the local clinic, quietly checking on the recovery of those injured in prior attacks, speaking little but observing everything, his presence a calming force that reassured villagers without drawing unnecessary attention. Gio, still shaken but emboldened by the recent events, accompanied him, learning from McCall's subtle strategies as the older man demonstrated the value of patience, observation, and anticipation in countering threats, the lessons unspoken yet clear in the way he moved, assessed, and corrected situations before they escalated. Meanwhile, whispers of McCall's intervention began to reach neighboring towns, carried by travelers, merchants, and returning villagers, creating an aura of quiet reverence mixed with fear among criminal elements who realized that Altamonte was no longer an easy target. The Quaranta network, fragmented and leaderless, struggled to maintain cohesion as distrust and paranoia set in, and McCall's indirect influence extended far beyond the town's cobblestone streets. Back at the villa he had used as temporary headquarters, McCall meticulously reviewed reports, financial transactions, and communications, coordinating with Emma Collins to ensure the evidence of illegal operations was documented and leveraged for broader enforcement actions, while simultaneously planning contingencies for any remaining loyalists seeking revenge. The town's daily rhythm resumed, children running through markets, fishermen repairing nets, women selling produce with renewed energy, and McCall observed these scenes with a quiet satisfaction, understanding that the real victory lay not in bodies of criminals felled but in the restoration of agency, the revival of hope, and the subtle shift in the balance of power that left the town empowered and self-reliant. The shadow of his presence a protective barrier without ever being overt. As night fell, McCall walked the deserted streets alone, the warm glow of lanterns reflecting off the Amalfi waves, knowing that while immediate threats had been neutralized, his role as a guardian was perpetual, his vigilance ongoing, and that every action he took was a seed of stability in a world still rife with danger. Yet Altamont, for the first time in decades, breathed freely, a small town reclaimed, resilient, and ready to defend itself, with its silent protector already preparing for the inevitable challenges the world beyond its shores would continue to bring. The following week brought a tenuous calm, yet McCall remained ever watchful, understanding that peace in Altamonte was fragile and that the Quaranta remnants could strike at any moment, seeking vengeance for their losses. He conducted discreet patrols along the town's perimeter, checking supply routes, speaking in careful tones with Gio about potential weak points, while quietly training local volunteers in situational awareness and defensive maneuvers, instilling in them the principles of vigilance and preparedness without fostering fear. Emma Collins, recovering from her injury, arrived periodically to coordinate intelligence updates, sharing her observations about the larger Camorra network and ensuring that McCall's actions were strategically aligned with international law enforcement, their collaboration seamless despite the unspoken emotional bond developing between them. The villagers, initially wary of McCall's presence, gradually embraced his guidance, learning to recognize subtle warning signs and reinforce their community's defenses, while still carrying on with their daily lives, fishing, tending vineyards, repairing homes, an interplay of normalcy and preparedness that McCall observed with a measured satisfaction. Meanwhile, Vincent Quaranta, furious and humiliated, attempted to rally remaining allies across Naples and Rome, sending operatives to reconvene and reclaim power, but McCall's preemptive actions and intelligence sharing with local authorities thwarted these efforts, leaving Vincent increasingly isolated and paranoid. One evening, McCall discovered a covert surveillance operation set up along the cliffs overlooking the Amalfi coastline, intended to track his movements and the town's activities. He neutralized it with precision, leaving behind no trace, a silent warning that any attempt to disrupt Altamonte would be met with unrelenting consequences. In the quiet aftermath, the town's children played near the piazza fountain, merchants bartered over produce, and the air carried a sense of cautious optimism, McCall watching from a distance, ensuring that the fragile peace endured, that Altamonte remained a haven free from external domination, and that each action taken, no matter how small, reinforced the invisible barrier of safety that he had constructed around it, a testament to his unwavering dedication, methodical strategy, and the quiet power of one man determined to protect the innocent, leaving a legacy of resilience that would outlast the memory of any enemy defeated in the shadows. McCall continued to weave himself into the fabric of Altamonte, not as a hero, but as a shadowy guardian whose presence was felt more than seen. He meticulously mapped the town streets, noting the best vantage points, escape routes, and hidden alleys, ensuring that any threat could be detected and neutralized before it reached the villagers. Under his guidance, Gio and a handful of trusted locals began conducting regular patrols, communicating via hand signals and discreet rendezvous points, a silent network of protection that moved like a living organism throughout the town. Meanwhile, McCall kept a careful eye on the surrounding countryside, watching for unusual traffic, unmarked vehicles, or unfamiliar faces, understanding that the Camorra's desire for control extended far beyond Altamont. He also reinforced the village's social cohesion, encouraging community gatherings, festivals, and shared meals, recognizing that a united town was far harder to intimidate than a fractured one. Emma Collins remained in constant communication, sending updates about Vincent's increasingly desperate maneuvers, while McCall discreetly sabotaged several minor operations intended to destabilize Altamonte, leaving Vincent unaware that his enemies had penetrated his plans at every turn. On one occasion, McCall intercepted a shipment of illicit weapons intended for local sympathizers, redirecting it to law enforcement and leaving subtle clues that suggested the Camorra's network was compromised. Nights were spent reviewing maps, testing perimeter security, and quietly training villagers in defensive techniques, while days were devoted to observing the town's rhythms, noting patterns in activity and movement, ensuring that no corner of Altamonte was left vulnerable. In the town square, laughter and conversation resumed, children chased one another along cobblestone streets, and artisans displayed their crafts. Yet beneath the surface, every citizen carried the awareness that they were protected, not by chance, but by the calculated vigilance of a man who had transformed their home into a fortress without their full realization. A quiet sentinel whose influence would remain long after the echoes of gunfire and threats had faded into memory, leaving Altamonte resilient, steadfast, and alive with the subtle power of silent guardianship. As tensions escalated, Vincent Quaranta grew increasingly erratic, his frustration and desperation clouding his judgment. Rumors of McCall's involvement began to circulate among his inner circle, though none could confirm the truth, and this uncertainty gnawed at Vincent's ego, making him unpredictable and reckless. He initiated a series of violent reprisals across neighboring towns, attempting to send a message, yet each act of terror only tightened McCall's network of observation and intervention. McCall, ever methodical, used these aggressive moves to anticipate Vincent's next steps, planting false intelligence and manipulating his adversaries into traps that left them exposed to law enforcement or each other. Emma Collins provided detailed updates on Vincent's finances, associates, and communication channels, which McCall exploited to disrupt his operations with minimal direct confrontation. One night, under the cover of darkness, McCall infiltrated a heavily guarded warehouse near Naples, dismantling a shipment of narcotics and replacing it with a harmless mixture that would expose several corrupt officials upon inspection. Each small victory compounded, leaving Vincent increasingly paranoid, questioning the loyalty of those around him and making decisions that grew more impulsive and dangerous. Meanwhile, McCall's presence in Altamonte inspired quiet courage among the villagers, who, though unaware of the full extent of his interventions, felt a growing sense of security and determination. Local children returned to play in the streets, markets thrived once more, and festivals resumed, but the undercurrent of vigilance never wavered, a silent testament to McCall's unwavering dedication. Even as the Camorra's influence loomed like a shadow beyond the hills, McCall's careful orchestration of every detail, from intercepting communications to neutralizing threats, ensured that Altamonte remained a sanctuary, a town poised between the calm of everyday life and the tense anticipation of what would come next, a living chessboard where McCall remained several moves ahead, unseen yet all-encompassing, preparing for the final confrontation that would decide the fate of the town and the justice that had been meticulously crafted in the shadows. McCall knew that the final confrontation with Vincent Quaranta could not be rushed. It required precision, patience, and absolute control over the environment. Over several days, he meticulously observed Vincent's routines, the patrols of his henchmen, and the security protocols around his mansion. Using subtle diversions and carefully placed misinformation, McCall manipulated Vincent into believing that he had the upper hand, while quietly neutralizing threats that could jeopardize his plan. One evening, under the dim light of a crescent moon, McCall positioned himself along the perimeter of Vincent's estate, blending seamlessly into the shadows, each movement deliberate and calculated. Inside the mansion, Vincent's paranoia had reached its peak, his men anxious and disorganized, unsure of where loyalty ended and betrayal began. McCall exploited every vulnerability, dismantling security cameras, disarming alarms, and eliminating isolated guards with precise efficiency. As dawn approached, McCall confronted Vincent in his private study, the room tense with the weight of inevitable justice. Words were minimal, actions spoke louder than any threats. In a swift, controlled series of maneuvers, McCall incapacitated Vincent, administering a potent, carefully measured dose of the drugs he had trafficked across Europe, a symbolic act of poetic justice. Vincent's last moments were marked by the stark realization of his defeat, the empire he had built on intimidation and violence crumbling silently around him. Outside, the townspeople, oblivious to the lethal precision of McCall's intervention, went about their mourning, unaware that the shadow over their lives had been lifted. By the time authorities arrived to investigate the mansion, McCall had disappeared into the misty streets of Altamonte, leaving only evidence of justice served and a message that those who prey on the innocent would meet their reckoning. His work complete, McCall returned to the village, where life began to regain its rhythm. Children laughing, market stalls bustling, and a community strengthened not just by survival, but by the unwavering presence of someone who had restored order through unyielding resolve. Altamonte, once threatened by fear and oppression, now stood resilient, its safety quietly ensured by a man whose principles transcended violence, embodying a justice both swift and unseen. With Vincent Quaranta's reign of terror ended, McCall shifted his attention to the people of Altamonte, understanding that true protection required more than eliminating immediate threats. He spent days walking the village streets, observing interactions, listening to concerns, and quietly advising those who had been intimidated by lingering fear. Small acts of reassurance, showing up at the local market, helping repair a damaged roof, assisting in the harvest, re-established a sense of normalcy and trust. Children, once wary of shadows, now ran freely, their laughter echoing through the narrow alleys, a testament to the calm restored by McCall's presence. Emma Collins, whose admiration for McCall had grown into a deep respect, documented the recovery efforts, connecting them with broader international agencies to ensure the town's continued safety. McCall's interventions extended to financial safeguards, returning stolen funds to the elderly couple, assisting local businesses in establishing secure transactions, and educating villagers on methods to protect themselves from future exploitation. Despite his heroic efforts, McCall remained unobtrusive, never seeking recognition, understanding that his role was to empower, not dominate. In private moments, he reflected on the moral weight of his actions, the fine line between justice and vengeance, and the cost of carrying such responsibilities alone. The town slowly transformed from a place overshadowed by fear to a vibrant, united community, strengthened by shared resilience and the quiet, unwavering guidance of a man whose life had always been defined by service, precision, and the relentless pursuit of justice. As the sun set over the Amalfi Coast, McCall stood on a cliff overlooking Altamonte, knowing that while danger might resurface, the foundation of security and hope he had built would endure, leaving a legacy not written in headlines but in the daily lives of those he had saved. Even as the immediate danger of the Quaranta brothers was removed, the weight of the events lingered over Altamonte like a silent storm that had passed but left its mark, a reminder of how easily lives could be upended by those who wielded power without conscience. Robert McCall moved among the townspeople with the same quiet vigilance he had always carried. No fanfare, no announcements, no applause, only the steady, unrelenting presence of someone who knew both the fragility and resilience of human life. The streets, once filled with wary glances and cautious movements, slowly began to echo with laughter, with the normal rhythm of daily routines returning as if the town were exhaling after holding its breath for too long. McCall spent his days attending to small crises, not because they demanded the attention of a trained former Marine and DIA officer, but because he understood that true safety was born from confidence, from the knowledge that one's community was protected and prepared. He helped repair homes damaged in the firebombings, worked alongside villagers to reinforce the local market and storage spaces, and taught those willing to listen small but vital techniques for remaining vigilant in the face of potential threats. He was everywhere, and yet no one could truly track him. He was the invisible hand guiding the village towards security without ever demanding recognition. Children, who had once run at the sound of raised voices or unfamiliar footsteps, now played in the sunlit squares and along the cobblestone alleys, their carefree energy a reflection of the calm McCall had restored. Mothers smiled without worry, fathers no longer tensed at shadows. Life was returning to its natural cadence, and McCall's presence, though discreet, had woven a safety net of reassurance that would linger even in his absence. Emma Collins remained close, her partnership with McCall solidifying into a professional and personal bond grounded in mutual respect and understanding. She had arrived in Altamonte originally to investigate the CIA lead, to tie loose ends regarding the winery's illicit operations and the Quaranta brothers' criminal network, but she found herself drawn into the life of the town itself, inspired by McCall's methods and the transformative effect he had on the people around him. She documented the rebuilding efforts, coordinated with international agencies to provide the town with continued protection, and ensured that the financial restitution McCall had arranged reached those who had been most affected by the Quaranta extortion schemes. Together, though their collaboration never felt like a partnership in the traditional sense, they became a silent team, orchestrating the continued stability of Altamonte while maintaining the delicate balance between intervention and self-sufficiency. Collins, for the first time in her career, experienced firsthand the kind of moral clarity McCall operated with, a clarity that demanded precision, patience, and a willingness to make choices that carried weight beyond the immediate consequences. She had been raised to follow orders, to rely on protocols and bureaucratic safeguards, yet in Altamonte, she saw the necessity of judgment, of acting decisively when institutions failed or moved too slowly. Meanwhile, McCall continued to patrol the edges of the town, walking its cliffs and narrow roads not as an enforcer but as a guardian who understood that the peace he had imposed was both delicate and temporary. He visited the families affected most directly by the Quaranta brothers' actions. Gio Benucci and his family, recovering from the attack on his home. Angelo, whose fish store had been firebombed and was now being rebuilt with the help of McCall's guidance, and the elderly couple whose pension funds had been looted but had been restored through McCall's strategic return of the winery funds. He encouraged them not simply to trust him, but to trust themselves, to understand that vigilance and courage could prevent further tragedies. And while he moved quietly among them, he never fully revealed the depth of the dangers he had neutralized, nor the lengths to which he had gone to protect them. McCall knew that the town's sense of safety was as much about their belief in their own strength as it was about his interventions. Yet McCall's life remained solitary by choice. Nights found him on the cliffs overlooking the sea, the wind carrying the distant hum of Altamonte's renewed life, and his mind inevitably wandering back over the decisions he had made, the violence he had executed, and the fragile balance between justice and retribution. He considered the men he had killed, the harm they had intended, and the lives he had preserved, and he understood that this line he walked was narrow, the weight of moral responsibility almost unbearable. Even as he looked upon the village, he realized that his presence was not a guarantee of eternal peace, only a temporary shield against those who would harm the innocent. He reflected on his past missions, on the countless instances where he had acted alone, where choice and consequence collided in ways no one else could understand. The clarity of purpose, however, gave him a steady resolve. He could not allow hesitation to compromise lives, nor could he allow attachment to blind him to the practical realities of protecting the vulnerable. The village began to hold small celebrations, gathering in the square to enjoy the warmth of community after months of fear. McCall, always careful not to intrude unnecessarily, participated in these moments when he was needed or when someone sought his counsel, but never became the center of attention. He watched children play football on the uneven cobblestones, their shouts and laughter echoing against the stone walls, and smiled faintly to himself, a rare display of emotion in a life usually ruled by calculation and restraint. Locals brought him small gifts, gestures of gratitude that he politely refused, emphasizing that no thanks was necessary, that the true reward was the survival and unity of Altamont. Collins, ever observant, noted the subtle changes in the village, the increased confidence of its citizens, and the reduction in fearful expressions, documenting them with a sense of awe and a deep understanding of McCall's influence. Behind the scenes, McCall continued his silent war on remnants of the Quaranta network. Although Vincent and Marco had been neutralized, the criminal organization had tentacles stretching beyond Altamonte, and McCall understood that allowing them to regroup unopposed could bring new threats. He communicated covertly with Italian law enforcement, with Collins, and with trusted international operatives, coordinating intelligence and ensuring that Altamonte would not be used as a foothold for renewed criminal activity. His methods remained discreet, avoiding unnecessary exposure or publicity, preserving the autonomy and dignity of the town's citizens while ensuring their security. Each night, he reviewed the town's layout, potential vulnerabilities, and the broader regional criminal landscape, planning preemptive measures while maintaining the calm, non-intrusive demeanor that allowed the townspeople to feel safe without fear of surveillance or intrusion. The emotional weight of his role was ever present. McCall carried with him the knowledge of lives saved and lives lost, understanding that justice was not simply a matter of righting wrongs but of preventing harm and fostering resilience. He thought of those he had failed, of moments when timing, circumstances, or sheer chance had prevented him from intervening sooner, and he allowed himself brief moments of reflection, not indulgence. Through these reflections, he maintained a constant self-assessment, a discipline that ensured he remained precise, empathetic, and unwavering in his commitment to protecting those who could not defend themselves. Collins, noticing these brief moments, recognized the inner burdens he bore and the extraordinary discipline required to maintain his moral code in the face of violence, temptation, and isolation. As weeks turned into months, Altamonte began to flourish again. Markets reopened fully, schools resumed without fear of disruption, and the football team, having won their local league, celebrated a victory that symbolized more than athletic success. It represented resilience, survival, and the reclaiming of a life stolen by fear. McCall attended the celebrations at a distance, observing, subtly guiding, always ready to intervene but never dominating the narrative, allowing the villagers' courage to take center stage. Collins, now deeply integrated into the town's fabric, coordinated with authorities to ensure that protections were institutionalized, that Altamonte would not have to rely on a single man's interventions in the future. McCall recognized the necessity of his eventual departure, understanding that reliance on him as a constant guardian could foster dependency rather than empowerment. In the quiet of one evening, McCall stood alone at the cliff overlooking the Amalfi coast, the fading light casting a golden hue over the waves. The village lay below, illuminated by the warm glow of street lamps, children's laughter drifting upward, a sense of normalcy and hope pervasive. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a measure of peace, a recognition that his actions had created lasting change, that the lives saved and the community strengthened were tangible proof of the value of intervention tempered by restraint and understanding. He thought of the journey, from the initial violence at the winery through the harrowing confrontations with the Quaranta brothers, to the subtle, patient work of rebuilding the town's sense of safety and confidence. Each step had required calculation, courage, and an unwavering moral compass. Before departing Altamonte, McCall met privately with Gio Benucci and other key townspeople, advising them on maintaining vigilance, on fostering community cooperation, and on the importance of mutual support. He encouraged them to trust their instincts, to hold fast to the lessons learned during the crises, and to understand that strength lay not in fear or aggression but in unity and resilience. Collins, present during these conversations, documented the proceedings, capturing the essence of McCall's philosophy: protection through empowerment, courage through preparation, and justice tempered by conscience. As McCall finally prepared to leave, he was met with silent, respectful acknowledgement from the villagers, a tribute more profound than applause or praise, a recognition of the quiet hero who had walked among them, shielding them from harm without ever demanding acknowledgement. McCall departed by ferry under the cover of dawn, the early morning mist enveloping him as the coastline receded in the distance. He carried no trophies, no personal gain, only the quiet satisfaction of having altered the course of lives and a community for the better. Emma Collins waved from the dock, a silent acknowledgement of partnership and gratitude, understanding the depth of what had been achieved and the rare nature of a man like McCall, whose strength was measured not in power or recognition but in the lives preserved and the hope restored. As the ferry moved further from Altamonte, McCall's figure became a silhouette against the rising sun, a symbol of the enduring presence of justice in a world often governed by chaos, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage, precision, and moral clarity could carve out spaces of safety, dignity, and life. And as the waves closed behind him, he carried with him the knowledge that his work, though unseen and uncelebrated, had left a legacy not of legend, but of real, lasting change. A town reborn, a community strengthened, and the quiet, indelible mark of a man who had chosen to act when action was most necessary.